Most people over 75 do not suddenly feel different overnight. It happens quietly. One day, you pause in the middle of a sentence for just a second longer than usual. Not because the thought disappeared, not because the words are gone, but because your mind suddenly wants a little more space before continuing. And something about that moment stays with you. You begin to realize your brain is asking for a different rhythm now. A gentler rhythm. A quieter rhythm. Not empty. Not broken. Just more careful with its energy. There are changes that happen in later life that almost nobody talks about honestly. Not dramatic changes, not frightening ones. Small pauses, tiny hesitations, moments where the mind seems to step back for a breath before moving forward again. Most people around you would never notice. But you notice. You notice the extra few seconds before responding. The way noisy conversations feel heavier than they used to. The strange comfort of silence. The feeling that your thoughts still exist, but arrive more softly now. And perhaps the most important thing to understand is this. Your mind is not disappearing. It is learning what deserves energy and what no longer does. If you are someone who cares about emotional well-being, gentle aging, and understanding the changing rhythm of the mind after 75, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Senior Wisdom. Because growing older is not only about what the body loses. Sometimes it is also about what the mind quietly protects. Eleanor was 79 and lived alone near the Oregon coast. Every afternoon, she called her younger sister in Arizona. The conversations were never complicated. Mostly little things. The weather, a neighbor's dog, what she made for lunch. One afternoon, Eleanor began telling a story about a grocery store cashier who reminded her of someone from many years ago. Halfway through the story, she stopped, not dramatically. She simply stared toward the kitchen window for 2 or 3 seconds. Her sister waited patiently. Then Eleanor smiled softly and continued exactly where she had left off. But afterward, she sat quietly in her chair, thinking about that pause. Years ago, her thoughts used to move faster than this. Now they seem to arrive in layers. First the feeling, then the memory, then the words. And strangely enough, the more tired she felt emotionally, the more often these pauses appeared. It was not confusion. It was hesitation with a purpose. Her brain no longer wanted to race ahead of itself. So she began doing something small whenever she felt her thoughts drifting apart. Before speaking again, she gently pressed her fingertips against the arm of her chair and took one slow breath. Just one. That tiny pause seemed to organize her thinking. Not perfectly, but enough. Over time, she noticed something surprising. The conversations became calmer, less rushed, more meaningful. She no longer felt pressured to speak quickly just to prove her mind still worked. And perhaps that is one of the quiet truths about the aging brain. Sometimes it slows the doorway between thought and speech because it is trying to protect clarity from overload. The moment passes, but something about it stays with you. Michael was 82 and had once taught American history at a small high school in Pennsylvania. For 40 years, he could lecture for an hour without losing a single thread of thought. Now retired, he spent most mornings reading in silence beside the fireplace. One evening, his grandson visited and began talking rapidly about work, sports, politics, and something on the internet Michael did not fully understand. The words came fast, too fast. Michael nodded politely, but inside, he could feel something unusual happening. His brain was quietly retreating from the conversation. Not because he could not hear, not because he did not care, but because the pace felt exhausting. He suddenly realized that his mind no longer enjoyed processing 5 directions of information at once. Years ago, he might have jumped into the discussion immediately. Now he needed space between ideas. After his grandson left, Michael sat in silence for a while, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator in the next room. And he noticed something important. The problem was not intelligence, it was mental crowding. The aging brain often values calm processing more than rapid reaction. So Michael created a tiny habit. Whenever conversations became overwhelming, he stopped trying to respond immediately. Instead, he quietly repeated one key word from the conversation in his mind. Just one word. That single mental anchor helped his thoughts stay connected instead of scattering. Over the next several months, he noticed less exhaustion after social gatherings. Not because his brain became faster, but because he stopped forcing it to compete with noise. And there is wisdom in that. The mind after 75 is not always asking for more stimulation. Sometimes it is asking for less interruption. Patricia was 76 and loved tending her small backyard garden in Northern California. Every morning she watered the tomatoes first, then the lavender, then the roses near the fence. One morning she walked from the garden into the house and suddenly stopped in the hallway. She looked around quietly. For a few seconds she could not reconnect with why she had entered the room. Not panic, not fear, just a strange blank pause. Then it returned. The scissors. She had come inside for the gardening scissors. The moment lasted maybe 4 seconds. But afterward, Patricia leaned against the kitchen counter, thinking about how often these tiny disconnects had started happening lately. It happens quietly. She began noticing that transitions between tasks felt heavier than before. Moving from one activity to another required more mental adjustment. And perhaps that is because the aging brain no longer changes direction instantly. It prefers smoother transitions. So Patricia created a tiny ritual. Before leaving one room for another, she softly repeated the next task out loud once. Scissors. Tea kettle. Phone charger. Simple. Gentle. Not because she was incapable, but because giving the brain one clear signal reduced unnecessary searching. Months later, she noticed fewer frustrating moments. Less mental static. Her thoughts felt steadier. And slowly she stopped interpreting those pauses as personal failure. Sometimes the mind is not losing direction. It is simply asking for cleaner pathways. Leonard was 80 years old and lived in a small town in Colorado with an aging rescue dog named Benny. Every evening, Leonard sat beside the living room lamp, reading old mystery novels. One night, he picked up his phone to read a short message from his daughter. The message itself was simple. But after reading it, Leonard stared quietly at the screen without responding. Not because he did not understand the words. His brain simply needed silence before reacting. Years ago, replies came instantly. Now they arrived slowly, almost like ripples moving through water. He noticed this especially on emotionally busy days. The mind seemed to tire faster from constant input. Television noise, phone notifications, background conversations. Too much at once created a kind of invisible mental fog. So Leonard began doing something very small before responding to messages or decisions. He looked out the window for 5 seconds. That was all. No deep meditation. No complicated technique. Just 5 seconds of visual stillness. The bare tree outside his apartment became a kind of mental reset button. And surprisingly, those brief pauses helped his thinking return more clearly. Not sharper, clearer. There is a difference. The aging brain often processes emotion and information more carefully because it no longer wants to waste energy reacting unnecessarily. And maybe that is not weakness. Maybe that is refinement. Denise was 77 and volunteered twice a week at the local library in Ohio. She loved helping children find books. But lately, she had noticed something during busy afternoons. When several people spoke to her at once, her brain seemed to freeze for a second before responding. The requests blurred together. A child asking for dinosaurs. A parent asking about library cards. Another volunteer discussing schedules. Denise could still handle each conversation individually, but all at once felt strangely draining now. Most people around her would never notice. She still smiled, still helped everyone kindly. But inside, she could feel her brain quietly pulling back from overstimulation. One afternoon, she stepped into the empty hallway near the storage room and placed her hand gently against the wall. Cool surface, stillness, silence. Within seconds, her thoughts settled again. After that, Denise began using tiny physical grounding moments throughout the day. A hand on the counter, fingers wrapped around a coffee mug, a slow inhale before answering. These little actions helped anchor her attention when the world became too loud, and over time she noticed something beautiful. She became less irritated by mental fatigue because she finally understood what it was. Her brain was not failing. It was filtering. The mind after 75 often protects itself by reducing how many signals it tries to process simultaneously. And perhaps that is why quiet spaces begin to feel so comforting later in life. Walter was 84 and spent most evenings listening to old radio programs in his recliner. He liked the familiar voices, the predictable pacing. One Thursday night, he suddenly realized he could not remember whether it was Wednesday or Thursday. Not for long. Just a brief uncertainty. A strange floating feeling. Then he looked at the newspaper beside his chair and immediately remembered. Thursday. The moment passed quickly, but it lingered emotionally. Because deep down, Walter remembered a time when his mind tracked everything effortlessly. Dates, appointments, names, conversations. Now some things seemed softer around the edges, less immediate. But as he sat quietly listening to the radio, he noticed something else. His mind still understood life deeply. It still recognized patterns, still understood people, still felt emotion with incredible richness. The speed had changed, not the humanity. So Walter stopped reacting harshly to those tiny moments of delay. Instead, whenever uncertainty appeared, he paused and slowly named 3 visible objects around him. Lamp, window, newspaper. That simple grounding habit helped reconnect his attention gently instead of forcing it. And perhaps that matters more than people realize. The aging brain responds better to reassurance than pressure. Clarity is often frightened away by panic, but it returns more easily in calm environments. Rosa was 78 and lived in New Mexico near her oldest daughter. Every afternoon, she sat near the front window with tea and crossword puzzles. Lately, she had begun noticing something difficult to explain. After long periods of noise or activity, her thoughts no longer felt fully inside reach. Not absent, just distant. As though her mind needed extra time to come back into focus. One afternoon, her grandchildren visited unexpectedly. They were laughing, running, talking over each other. Rosa loved them deeply. But after an hour, she suddenly felt mentally exhausted in a way she could not describe. So she quietly stepped onto the porch alone. No phone, no conversation, just fresh air and evening light. And after a few moments, her thoughts became clearer again. That was when she realized something important. Her brain was no longer designed for constant stimulation. It wanted recovery periods now, not isolation, not loneliness. Recovery. So Rosa began building tiny moments of silence into her day. 10 seconds between activities, a pause before answering the phone, a few quiet breaths before entering busy places. And gradually, her mind felt less strained, not younger, but gentler. There is dignity in learning your own rhythm. There is wisdom in recognizing when your mind needs softness instead of speed. Because after 75, the brain often becomes more selective about where it places attention. And perhaps that selectiveness is not something to fear. Perhaps it is a deeper form of intelligence, one that values peace over performance. Most people spend their younger years trying to think faster, respond faster, move faster. But later in life, something quietly changes. The mind begins searching for steadiness instead. And maybe that is why so many older adults eventually discover that silence feels nourishing in a way it never did before. The pauses become meaningful. The slower moments become protective. You stop reacting to every thought every sound, every interruption. And slowly, without realizing it, your mind begins choosing calm over chaos. That is not failure. That is adaptation. There are changes in the brain that do not mean something is wrong. Sometimes they simply mean the mind is aging more cautiously now, more intentionally. And when you stop fearing every pause, you begin understanding yourself more deeply. Because clarity is not always fast. Sometimes clarity arrives softly. So if you have recently experienced a small moment where your thoughts seem to slow down in a way that felt difficult to explain, you are not alone. Maybe it happened while searching for a word. Maybe while entering a room. Maybe during a loud conversation where your mind quietly stepped backward for a moment. There is no shame in these experiences. Sometimes they are simply signs that your brain is asking for a gentler pace. If this video spoke to you, please share your thoughts in the comments. What is one quiet moment recently that made you feel your mind slowing down? Not in a frightening way, but in a way that felt strangely different. And if you found comfort in this conversation, please like this video and subscribe to Senior Wisdom for more gentle discussions about aging, emotional well-being, and the changing rhythm of the mind. Thank you sincerely for spending this time here today. May your mind feel peaceful, your thoughts feel gentle, and your days unfold at a pace that truly fits your soul.